Hi, and welcome to Mistakes to Avoid When Issuing a Quote. My name is Dana Zifisak, and I'm a travel agent educator, and I teach other agents what I did to build my business. And I'm so happy you're here. I'm just going to go ahead and um, make sure this is up. Let me see. Live now. Perfect. Okay. Awesome. Okay, I hope you had a great day. Oh, and if you can see behind me, that's just an air purifier. That's normally that is out of the camera, but I've been doing some rearranging in my office, and sometimes I forget to look at what it looks like behind me. All right, let me go ahead. I'm going to share. Okay. Okay. Awesome. So just bear with me for 1 second as I delete comment. There we go. All right. So here we are. I want to just make sure that also how can I tell people that it's going? Let me see. Okay. Maybe at follow. No. Okay. Oh, we don't need that. Okay. I'm just going to leave it because I see that it worked. Hi, Karen. Okay, so let's talk about mistakes to avoid when quoting. All right. So in our business, okay, so you got into this business because you have the passion for travel and you want to help people book their trips and, get them the same type of experience that you experience when you travel. You don't want it to be stressful for them. You don't want it to be, you don't want it to be hard. Now, but what we have to understand when we are selling, okay, that we have two different jobs. We have a lead and then we have the marketing that brings us that lead, okay? So all the marketing you do is to bring you some business. Okay. So the marketing brings us leads. And then we have to go into the sales process for qualifying them and getting to a quote. Okay. So we have to keep that in mind that once we have that lead, your marketing worked awesome, or a referral worked, or however that lead came in. I really see marketing as a total ecosystem. Okay. It's not just one thing, it's a continuous environment of things that people come to expect that you are the expert that they need. So once you get a lead, you're now in a sales position. Okay. And that's what we're going to talk about today. When you get that lead, you want to qualify them so that you can get to a quote. So let's go through the first mistake. A lot of times we get a lead and we rush to get a quote out. Like we can't wait to quote this destination that we love. Okay. And, or this cruise that you are just so excited for them. Okay. And you just want to get them pricing. But what do you price out? You're rushing to get the quote out. You need to slow down and find out some things from them. Okay. We call that qualifying. We call that qualifying the client. And yes, you can use a quote request form, but honestly, you need more information than a form can give you. And if you gave somebody a form with all the information you need, not many people would fill it out. Okay. I use a form for basic information. That's helpful. But I need to get to the heart of what people want to do. So, for example, if someone's going on a cruise, we have to determine, okay, which ship. Okay. If they have a ship in mind, that's great because that's one part of it. Which itinerary? Like where do they want to go? What they want to go on a cruise? Well, where do you want to go to cruise to? You can cruise to so many different destinations. You have to narrow it down for them. So we get it narrowed down, but then you want to talk to them about their experience on the ship. Do they want to be close to things? Do they just want the most inexpensive room? Okay. And if they do, make sure you're explaining to them what the most inexpensive room gives them. Okay. Everybody has the same experience on the ship, but within your room, you have different amenities, or you might have different level of service if you get a concierge room. And you want them to understand what they're going to be experiencing. And a lot of times, if you rush to get a quote out, they're just going to look at it and be like, this isn't what I want. Okay. You want to qualify, you want to take some time. And I alluded a little bit to this one, not knowing their expectations for their trip. You cannot assume anything in this business because you don't know if somebody's going to want a concierge level cruise, or are they going to want a, budget friendly, let's go, you know, we want to just get out on the water and have fun. Okay. There's room for both, but you need to know that about them. So a lot of times we can do that over email. A phone call is best. Oh, a phone call is best. A Zoom call is better. An in-person meeting is better. However, a lot of times those things are not for everybody. Okay. People can't meet in person because they have to work. People can't do Zoom because, they're busy all day. They are running around. So whatever, or a phone call might be too hard to schedule. You need to somehow communicate with them, whether it be email, text, messenger, a phone call, a Zoom, an in-person meeting. There's all kinds of ways to communicate. All right. Pick what works best for the client and for you. I mean, you're part of this too. However, I find I get better results when I meet the client where they want to communicate with me. I have one client who is messenger all the time. Messenger. Now, I still email her things, but I used to be very stringent about email, and I still am. Like, I want people to email me, but a lot of times if you're qualifying a client or a prospect, or a lead, you want to get answers from them. So you might have to go and, well, how does that look on your side? So what I do is, if I'm messaging with someone and then I need to do something, I then take screenshots of the message and I email them to myself. So that way I have a record in my email where I like to keep my records. But, and then we also have our CRMs where we can track things in. We need to meet the clients where they are, and we have to ask them, well, what do you want? What do you want your experience to be on the ground or on the ship? Okay. We need, and that an expectation might be, they might have no idea what to expect. Okay. And that's when you have to really talk to them about that's what they're going into. And that's another thing. I'm a big proponent of selling what you know. If you have not experienced a product, it is hard to sell it, because what kind of expectations should they have? And you want to be able to relate that to them especially well. So you need to know what you're selling, and then you need to be able to understand what that client wants to do. Okay. And then put that into a quote. So it's a lot of interpersonal communication that has to happen here, but that gets you the result that you want and the result that they want. They want an awesome cruise. You want to send them on that awesome cruise. Okay. Like, our business is very interesting. We do so much marketing to get the leads in, but just because you have a lead doesn't mean you're going to get a client. Okay. You need to make sure that during this qualifying stage, you are knowing what they want out of their trip. Okay. Like, I want to tell them, okay, so if you're on deck 5, so let's just say the Disney Wish, because I was just on that last month. If you were on deck, I think we were on deck 6, actually. I loved being on deck 6 because we found ourselves going down to deck 3 or 4, or I think we were on, I can't remember now, but either way, we were close to like the main decks. I used to like being up higher, being close to the pool deck, but we now don't spend a lot of our time at the pool, on the pool deck. Okay. We found that we like to do more of the like bingo and we eat at the sit down restaurants because we have celiac, so it's just easier to do that. And so we found that we were going down more, and that just became I was like, oh, this is actually a better location for us. Now, for someone who might be going to the pool deck a lot or going to the buffet, you might want to put them on a different deck. People don't realize that you want to know what your experience is like to recommend where to go, because there's all these choices in travel. All right. And that's where you bring your expertise. That's where you're valuable, is what the advantages of deck 11 versus deck 6. And why is deck 11 more? Well, because the closer you are to the top, they tend to charge you more. That's, but if someone is worried about seasickness, where to recommend for them, all of these things that, yes, they can Google, but wouldn't they rather have somebody who's been there and is going to personalize it for their trip? Okay. So that's the second one. The third mistake we make is we give them too many choices. All right. If they wanted to make a choice, they could do that on their own. Okay. There are lots of ways that people can get information, and what we all are suffering from in general is an overabundance of information out there. So what we need to do is, in our qualifying, narrow down 2 or 3 options for them based off of our conversation to give them 2 or 3 really good choices. If you're trying to quote every category on the ship, that's not going to work. Okay. And that's why you can't issue a quote without knowing their expectations, without doing a qualifying process. Now, again, this is not for the people who have already been, they know what room they want. You don't need to do this, but I'm talking about a new to you client who says they want to go on a cruise or wherever. I'm just using a cruise as an example. And you need to learn from your qualifying what is their, what are their top choices, and what are their medium choices, and what are their low choices, and giving them that as a reference point. Now, listen, they might say this is coming in too high. And then you say, okay, well, maybe we go from a 7-night cruise to a 4-night cruise. Okay. And even so, because a lot of times if you're qualifying on the phone, you can throw prices at them quickly just to give them a range. That is, when you're doing it over text or email or something like that, it's a little harder to do that. So you might have to reissue the quote, but it will, you're not going to issue a quote for a 7-night, a 4-night, and a 3-night cruise. You shouldn't, at least. You should understand, based on your qualifying, where they're going to be. Okay. I want to know what sailing they want to be on before I give a quote. Okay. Because the quote means that we've narrowed down, okay, we're not going to Alaska. We're not going to Europe. We're going to go to the Caribbean or the Bahamas. They want to go to Castaway Cay or Lighthouse Point, and they want to do that whole Disney thing. Okay. And then you want to narrow this down to their schedule, to this, to that. And they might ask you for different quotes to compare. And what I do then is I really try to narrow down, okay, what is about the dates? And they're trying to see if one date is better than the other. And then I can give them an idea. Okay, well, if you sail, a lot of the sailings are the same price, like with Disney. Not the same exact price, but if you're comparing, the week of August 9th versus the week of August 16th, they're going to be pretty comparable. Now, if you're comparing Christmas week versus Martin Luther King week, well, that's probably a bad example. A random week in January that's not Martin Luther King weekend, there's going to be a big difference in cruise price. Okay. So that's something you do in qualifying. Okay. You try to understand, what are they trying to, and most of the time it is price. They want to know, is this week cheaper or this week cheaper? Well, you can do that without a quote and say, you're going to get a better rate if you go on this week. Okay. And they still, if they want to see multiple dates, I'll do it, but it's not my first thing, because I don't want them to get too overwhelmed. I want to try to remove all of the overwhelming elements before I send the quote, because too many choices means that it's going to be harder for them to make a decision. We live in a world where we are constantly bombarded by choices. Okay. And we're always having to make choices. Okay. And sometimes our brains want a break. And if we can make it easy And I'm not saying you're just pulling these things out of thin air. You're going to qualify them. You're going to ask them the questions. You're going to get them to narrow down. And then you're able to complete a quote. And that way your quote is more personalized to them and it has the choices, like if you're talking to a guest, to a client, and they're not going to be a value resort person, you're not going to quote them a value resort. Okay. You kind of get an idea when you're talking to them. And you also tell them, like, so if I'm doing Disney, for example, or Universal, I'm giving them an overview of everything and what their hotel choice, because a lot of times the ticket prices are the same, meals are the same for Disney, meal plans. And where their pricing is going to fluctuate is which hotel they pick. Okay. And so that's what I spend time in my qualifying, is narrowing down where they want to go and telling them, hey, if you decide you want to do a 5-day ticket instead of a 4-day ticket, we can figure those kinds of things can be modified. Okay. You don't have to make a decision on the dining plan right away. I try to give them as few choices as possible to make. And that way it's easy for them to say, yes, this is what I want. All right. But this comes from doing a good qualifying process where you've kind of narrowed down exactly what they want. Okay. And so we want to make sure that we're giving them good choices, but not like 5 different choices, because that's too many for the brain. 2 or 3. Okay. 2 or 3 choices with resort and things like that. And then if they choose a certain resort, and then you're talking about, well, would you like a view, or would you like this? Would you like that? That's also part of your qualifying process. However, what I also do is I'll add in, like, okay, if you want a theme park view plus, $950 or whatever it is, try to just say, okay, well, these are the options available within this resort that you have. So we get the choice down to a resort. And then we're going to say, okay, which room type do you want? Resort view, where you might see the garbage cans or the parking lot, or a water view where you have a more pleasant view like the pool or a lagoon or a lake. Okay. So I don't always assume that they want the resort view or that they want the lake view. You want to present those options to them, but first get them to narrow down to the resort. Okay. Because then you can give them some options there. It sounds labor intensive, and it is, but this is work. Okay. And what your job is to make the choices easy for them. Okay. And your quote is something you want them to confirm and say, yes, let's deposit it. We want to get them to deposit as soon as possible. And so we want to do it little by little, making little decisions along the way. That way, and the decisions they need. What are the decisions they need to make? Their dates. Okay. Who's going? All right. Where do they want to stay? And that's where a lot of our qualifying comes in. Okay. Where they want to stay. What do they want to do? All right. So there's a lot that goes into this part. And especially if you do FITs, you really need to have a good qualifying call, because that is a very involved process. And you don't want to be doing all of these different quotes and, having them just get overwhelmed. Some people we live in this society where people want the information immediately. Okay. And sometimes we try to emulate that. But if you have the right client, and sometimes clients just want to price shop and then like, okay, well, where am I getting the best deal? That might not be the best client. A client who understands that you're going to walk them through the choices and say, and based off of what you know about them, you're going to give them your opinion and help them make the right decision for their trip. Okay. That's the difference between us and Expedia. We're not just giving them numbers. Okay. It's not about just giving them numbers, it's about telling them what is going to work and what's not going to work for their trip. If they say, my budget is a flat $5,000, you have to be honest with them and say, if that's what you have to spend, this is what you're going to get. Now, and a lot of times I don't even talk about budget with a client, which that's a whole nother session. Okay. But let's talk about on Thursday. So come back on Thursday where we're going to talk about selling deluxe resorts, selling the upgrades. Okay. How to do that. All right. So I will see you on Thursday. Thank you for coming, and I will see you later this week. Bye bye.